One of the most contentious aspects of this channel revolves around a video I made a couple of years ago now, where I said that I didn't think jazz was black music. This had grown out of a video I'd done before, which was a very casual video. Back then I was just doing top tens and quite inoffensive stuff, and one day I was thinking about jazz and somebody had messaged onto the channel, and one of the comments they put, why does all modern jazz sound the same? So I copied and pasted that as a title and discussed it, talked about it. That was the video that seemed to reach out into the world, and before I knew it I had a lot of quite influential people contacting me, some agreeing, some disagreeing, but all interested in the fact that I'd said it. So I then did a series of videos looking at the sort of history of jazz, and my history of jazz back then was pretty good. I'd read a lot of books, but because I was doing these videos, I started to really go deeper and deeper into the origins of jazz. Believe it or not, I did a video before then called, it was like a 4 or 5 part series called The Origins of Jazz. There, I'd been much closer to the usual, more established view of the jazz history. But when I went looking for the evidence for that, I didn't find it. And it became quite apparent to me, at least, that jazz was predominantly European in terms of the actual influences in there, the harmony and the instruments that are played, and the sort of the way the arrangements, all these sorts of things were had come from sort of European music. So we couldn't say it was a music of Africa. When you start to look at the rhythms, I've noticed that the actual history of the rhythmic development of jazz is not as simple as just its African rhythms, applied to marching music. That's not what happened. And also, going back into the bands that had created jazz, I got back to the sort of 1890, and as far back as I could go, I could find white bands playing jazz and black bands playing jazz. And the nature of the sort of Jim Crow rules that defines one person as black and one person's not as black, it also became apparent to me that secretly these bands had, the white bands had black people that looked white playing in them. That would have been classed as black, but they looked white so they could earn more money. And there were white people going over and jamming with black people, usually very middle class people, because they loved the music. And within that sort of brew, that is where jazz was born. And it became quite apparent to me that this was an American music form, not a black music form. In exploring this, I then came across Albert Murray, who is a cultural and jazz historian and critique, and in 1970 he wrote a book called Omni American that had a very similar way of thinking as I was thinking. Suffice to say, putting these videos out did not go down well with large sections of the population. And it got me a reputation of being a contentious YouTuber, which obviously grew the channel. And that's always a tempting thing to know that by going out and saying something contentious, you will get the viewers. But also, I sometimes equate being contentious with being interesting and talking about something that people want to listen to, because perhaps there's questions that haven't been answered correctly or haven't been answered at all. And so here we are, a number of years down the line, and a few weeks ago, I spotted a video on Truth Saviour's channel, who is one of the guys that has pushed back against my view about the origins of jazz. But it's a very interesting channel, and he was describing a sort of a thing that's coming out of my country where black British people are sort of looking at black American people and going, why do you control what black culture is, what black music is? We do great, music as well. And I saw this infighting in there, so I decided to weigh in as I do, and I did a video about it. the comments start up again. I've had lots of discussions online. And one of the things that's frustrated me about doing this is the fact that when I was telling this history, I got so bogged down by people arguing with every aspect of it and with them not having any evidence of pushback, which should have just left me go, well, come up with your version of it and then I'll question it then. But no, I engaged in all these conversations and I couldn't move on to the point I wanted to make. I'm going to make this point on this video, and this video is going to be a difficult video. It's going to be a long-winded video. It's not going to have any humour or jokes in it like other videos I do, and it's going to be a lot of talking. I have placed myself in front of the sort of wood panelling to make me look like I'm in some sort of British stately home. I'm not. That's a conceit, but I've placed myself in a certain place so I look sort of like I've got some sort of authority to talk on this, which I'm telling you now because that is the nature of these videos. You're not reading a book, you're not reading an essay, and it's not a documentary, it's a bloke talking to you, right? So of course you're going to get my point of view. And I suppose that's the best place to start, isn't it? Now, those of you who know about jazz will have seen that the title for this video is Blackness, spelled BLACKNUSS. And then there's a picture of a gentleman on the cover wearing dark sunglasses. Those of you who know your jazz history will see that that's Rahsaan Roland Kirk. In 1971, Rahsaan Roland Kirk brought an album out called Blackness. And when I was about 14 years old, I was at some sort of, I think it was some sort of English antiques fair. So there I am with my mum and dad doing a very English thing of walking around looking at old china and bits of war memorabilia. And I spotted this album in a box on one of the stalls, and I'd heard of Rahsaan Roland Kirk. I didn't know why I'd heard of Rahsaan Roland Kirk, but I'd heard of him, and I looked at the picture on the front, and there he was in his famous pose of playing 3 saxophones at once. And so I asked my dad for the small amount of money to buy this album secondhand, and I took it home. When I got home, I didn't know whether I liked it or not. I was bewildered by it. And the reason for that is because I walked into Rahsaan Roland Kirk's world. And Rahsaan Roland Kirk is one of those musicians, a little bit like Sun Ra or Frank Zappa, that occupies their own thing. And it's really hard to compare them to anybody else. What's interesting is that Rahsaan Roland Kirk had associations with both Sun Ra and Frank Zappa. He's one of those characters, an incredible character. And I think that he represents, for me personally, as a white British middle class person, when somebody goes, this is black music, this is our music, blah, 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 blah. I think of this album. I think of sitting there as a kid with this album, looking at the word blackness and the spelling of it and liking it. I like that idea. I like the way it had been spelt. It was cool. And putting this album on, which when I put it on was just a bunch of soul covers, like instrumental soul covers. And I remember thinking, I thought he was like Coltrane, this bloke. I thought it was all going to be way out. And it's not. It's just these soul covers and he's just playing them. Maybe, it's on Atlantic Records. I think it was on Atlantic Records. Maybe he's sold out. He's sold out, hasn't he? Oh, that's terrible. He's like one of these proper jazz musicians, one of these proper black jazz musicians has sold out just trying to... and it was cool playing because I was a bit of a jazz, rock and fusion fan, and there was some funky stuff on there, and there was some cool saxophone solos. I flip it over onto side 2, and there's an epic version of The Old Rugged Cross, which of course is an old spiritual tune that goes back through the gospel, the gospel world of American music, black American music, and then back to Europe and back to the hymns on which many American folk songs and the blues are based. And then when he gets to his solo, I realise why this is so long. We've had about 2 or 3 minutes in, we get to the solo, he starts soloing, then he hits a note, and he holds this note for the rest of the duration of this track, which I think is about 10 minutes long. That thing, for me, at 13, 14, instantly made me love this album, all right? And as he was holding this note, the band seemed to, they bubbled up and seemed to go deeper into the improvisation, which is what I wanted, you know. I roughly knew that the Old Rugged Cross was I would have thought it was an old black gospel tune. He'd gone back to the roots. He was playing it in a very old-fashioned way, almost like he was taking the mickey out of it in the beginning. Lots of vibrato on that saxophone and all that sort of stuff. And then he takes off and takes it to somewhere else. But the fact is, it got to me. It got to me, right? Now, why did it get to me? The reason it got to me is because my dad was a jazz fan. I was brought up listening to jazz, right? As was my brother. But I was different to my brother in that I absolutely loved this music. And as I listened to the pop music of the day and got involved in heavy metal, I became very aware that it was like in my system, deep down, I had a magnetic center for this thing in music. And I could listen to a piece of music and I could see that there was aspects that had come from pop music or rock music, blah, blah, blah. But in all music, there was this thing, and the only word I could have called it would have been the title of Rahsaan Roland Kirk's album, Blackness. There was a sound in there, and that sound, I believed, had come from, black people. I didn't know whether they were American or African. I didn't know. I just felt there was a black sound there. I was very aware of it. And as I was listening to drummers and musicians, I loved all my drummers, John Bonham and Cozy Powell and all these players, and they were great. And when I heard them, I could hear a feeling in the music, which I could have said, the reason why John Bonham's so good is because there's a blackness in his sound. But I then decided to discover drummers like Harvey Mason and Ndugu and Bernard Purdie, and they had it in buckets, and I became very aware that was the sort of drummer I wanted to be. And I put my head deep into this stuff, right? So when I'm saying that I don't think that jazz is black music, it's not as though I'm a fool and I don't know what that means, you see? I feel very, very strongly as part of my system that there is a thing in jazz and in all popular music, but especially in soul and funk, it's in reggae, and this thing is this thing that comes from the black community, or it comes, where does it come? Is it the black community it comes from? Because I don't think it does, right? And if you want to be accurate about it and understand it and not end up going down a line of thinking that takes you to a world of untruth, right, or the lack of appreciation of this music, you've got to think what it is. Now, what I didn't realise is that Rahsaan Roland Kirk on this album wasn't selling out. He was making a point, and that point had reached me subconsciously if it hadn't reached me consciously. Now, 40 odd years later, and having a lifetime studying this music in massive depth and having a lot more information at my disposal, I returned to Rahsaan Roland Kirk, although I don't agree with everything he's stating, the fact is he is stating something with this album. He is not your normal jazz guy that just wants to play some tunes and show you how good he could solo. Rahsaan Roland Kirk is on a mission. And as far as I'm concerned, that mission was successful because me in the UK as a 14-year-old kid got it. And I want to try and explain what that is, because the only word for it is this idea of blackness. All right? So I have two choices here in the video. I can either talk about Rahsaan Roland Kirk's concept, or I could go through and carry on with my history of jazz, which I've never been able to say. So I think it would be interesting to carry on with my history of jazz and talk about how the idea of blackness originates in jazz and why there's so many people out there who say, I think jazz is black music, and also we'll talk about the music as though it's theirs. Right, so before we start, on this, I want to make two statements here before we start, so you understand where I'm coming from. The reason why I said jazz wasn't black music is twofold. One, because I don't think it was exclusively originated by black people, and I don't think it was predominantly originated by black people. In terms of the influences in there and the people that were involved in the making of it and all sorts of things, it's obvious this is an American music form made in America, and that's what makes it special, is it's American. It didn't come out of Africa, it didn't come out of South America, it came out of America. And you have to understand that. If you call it black music and think it was black musicians in New Orleans inventing it, you don't get the history right. And what you do then is you erase any sort of input, influence from non-black people, as we saw in Ken Burns' jazz history. And we will get onto that as well on this video. This one could be a long video, I'm afraid. And that's ended up with a whole bunch of people all over the world belittling Ken Burns' documentary, which is brilliant, and I love it. I watch it every single year, right? I love it, except it doesn't cover jazz properly. There's no Keith Jarrett. You know, there's no Stan Getz, there's no John McLaughlin, there's no Pat Metheny. Musicians that have sold millions of records and have been the most important players in jazz in the last 50 years were ignored. Jazz rock fusion was just pretending like it wasn't a wing of jazz. It was so unbelievably biased, and every single white musician that was talked about, they had to, rather than explain their genius, they had to explain how they got it from black people. Now, there's probably people here that are cheering along saying, well, that's right, it is right, but I don't think it was right. I don't think it was right. I think that genius is genius. And once you start belittling genius, if you start to think there's a difference in Django Reinhardt's genius, and it's based upon a lack of privilege, well, you can't say that, because Django was as unprivileged as anybody on the planet at that point. He was a gypsy. You know, if you want to say it was down to belonging to some sort of, racial class, well, of course that has an effect on black people in America, but it also had an effect on Django Reinhardt. I mean, look, it's like, what do you want to try and do? Do you want to diminish Django's genius and make all the mistakes of assuming he's a white person, so we're going to diminish that, and not actually getting who he was as an individual? Right? Do you want to do that to try and rebalance it so you're going to be bad like people were bad before? Or do you want to come from the sort of Kantian moral point of view that if it's bad to belittle people's genius or box it in, to ignore it, to whitewash it, which is exactly what happened to these geniuses? And I'm going to explain to you what happened on this video, right? Because this is lacking from the history. It's just lacking. Now, I'm just a bloke on YouTube. You can just take this or leave it. I've got no authority, but at least I'm putting what I think it could be out there. And if I'm wrong, people will push against it and I'll be proved wrong. But even if that's the case, this conversation needs to happen, right? And I tell you why, because if it's not, something will happen to black music, and what it will do is it will get erased if it hasn't been erased already, okay? So, where were we? Ken Burns' jazz documentary misrepresents the history massively to me, right? So I feel it needs to be readdressed because millions were spent on that documentary, and there's a reason why millions were spent on that documentary, and there's a reason why this dogma about jazz has been pushed by the establishment, and why it is now the establishment view, and why I'm the contentious one for saying I don't think jazz is black music. Okay, when Pete LaRocca from the original Dixieland Jazz Band said black people never invented jazz, we invented jazz, he was completely wrong, he was out of order, and he was a racist. But he also played a massive role in the development of jazz, like incredibly huge. And so if you want to discount him because he's white and a racist, which is understandable, you also have to then discount the importance of the original Dixieland Jazz Band, and that there would be no jazz if it wasn't for them, unless somebody else had come along and been recorded and had the effect commercially to bring in the sort of capitalist white business class to look at this music and say, I think we can make some money out of it. Jazz, I believe, was created by American musicians. Okay, the reason why it's so incredible is because it's not just a new music form. There's things in jazz that we've never seen before, and I've spoken about them at length. Very quickly, it utilises improvisation as a foundational part. It's not just something that happens in it. It has to be there. It has swing and groove. It makes you want to dance. It goes beyond just being rhythmical and having a sort of characteristic of swing or groove or funk, right? And it relies entirely on the voice of the performer. The performer doesn't conform to a sort of classical idea of the sound of the instrument. The instrument is the sound of the person, and the way the music is orchestrated is it takes on board those ideas that you are not writing a song for a singer, that you're writing a song for Tina Turner, or you're writing a song for Frank Sinatra, you see? And what I've done there is I've shown that all popular music in the 20th century comes out of jazz and blues. Blues is another music form, and that is much closer to being a form of music that was created by Black Americans, without a doubt. But there's a difference with jazz. Jazz is something else. It's like a nuclear reactor of music. It's completely brand new. Now, when we start to argue over the Buddy Boldens and early jazz and how wonderful it was and how it was created by these people, the thing we don't realise is that this music was not sophisticated. It was just another novelty music. It was holding hands with minstrelsy more than anything else. It was a fun music that would basically rally the troops. You know, someone's walking down the road in New Orleans and some big loud trumpet player comes out like Buddy Bolden and he starts to play and everyone joins in and they walk down the road. It's not a sophisticated music form at all. Early jazz is like the original Dixieland Jazz Band. That's the closest we can come to, because they were a real New Orleans band that had worked from 1905 onwards. The players had a history that went back before Buddy Bolden in terms of their lineage. So when you listen to that, you hear raw New Orleans music. It's chaotic, and it's the chaos of the original Dixieland Jazz Band that people loved. It was like the punk rock of its time, and people were horrified of it because it wasn't an art form. It was chaotic, it was nihilistic, it was revolutionary. You know, people didn't care about the sounds of the instruments or technique. It was just big, loud, syncopated noise that was very exciting for young people. In 1917, the jazz age hadn't even begun. The big change culturally that was going to happen in the 1920s hasn't happened. The original Dixieland Jazz Band heralds that. Now, of course, yes, Freddie Kephart sounded like that. King Oliver's band would have sounded like that. Perhaps, although we don't know, even Buddy Bolden's band sounded like that. But it was that record that engaged the commercial aspects in America. So here's two things that gets glossed over in the history. Jazz at the beginning is not a sophisticated form of music. There's no reason artistically for us to save it, to value it now. 150 years later or whatever it is, there's no 125 years later, there's no utility in doing that. It was just some novelty music that was out there. Okay, it got recorded, it got very popular, and this novelty music actually helps create the American recording industry, which now wasn't going to just focus on light opera and sort of cocktail music and lovely songs from the musicals. It was going to have another aspect of it, which is going to play out through the 20th century and end up basically, I don't even say influencing, it basically ends up as 20th century music. Right? It's why I'm here, it's why you're here, it's what I talk about on this channel. I wish I could talk about this about Mozart and Bach. I can't. My knowledge is in 20th century music. Popular music, funk, rock, avant-garde, whatever it is. Even things like Philip Glass and all that has roots in the fact that people like the original Dixieland Jazz Band. Now, imagine you are now a black person and this music's kicking off, okay? And imagine you're not really a part of the black community, because the black community is like the white communities or the green community or the blue community. Communities don't have souls, right? The community is a collection of individuals, and what holds them together is within their individuality is the humanity, and that humanity holds us all together. Art engages in that sort of collective humanity, and it negotiates that with our individuality, and in that you have peace and unity and love. That's what I believe, and that's where you should follow. So imagine you're a black person in 1910. But you're not like the rest of your community. You are a genius, a creative genius. Now, creative geniuses, I believe, come through. There's a lot of talented people in the arts, and some of them get there, and you could say it's a fluke or not a fluke, but creative geniuses tend to come through. There's so many creative geniuses, like, say, Van Gogh, that weren't even famous in their time. They were so ahead. But our culture, because it was so valuable, what they'd done, our culture gravitates to it. This is something separate from the commerciality we see with the original Dixieland jazz band. Now, black people in America were exactly like every other person on the planet. They had all the talents, they had all the faults. They were all human beings, and human beings contains a class of people which we could call creative geniuses. And there was creative genius in the black community, okay? And they came from all strands of life. If you were born in 1899, like Duke Ellington, you were actually a middle class black American, still having to experience racism, but from a completely different background to someone born 2 years later, Louis Armstrong, who was basically right at the bottom of society in New Orleans, the center of what's going on. New Orleans at that time, the reason why jazz was created there wasn't because there's black people there. The reason why it was created there is because there's all sorts of different cultures there, and cultures coming in to a port city continually, and because the some of the things that inhibited black people doing stuff, it was more relaxed there for various reasons. Louis Armstrong's born into that. Now, Louis Armstrong's a genius. Now, he can't become a classical composer. He's not going to end up going to Juilliard and studying music. That's not going to happen to him. He's not going to become an author or a professor or a painter or a poet. What happened with jazz is that this novelty music, this shallow novelty music, by the time we get to 1920, and it's been around for maybe 20 or 30 years, just sat there, you know, what happened is that you almost like get a second generation born into it. People born around about 1900 to 1910 and now growing up within that, and they're able to look at this novelty music form and go, and I don't think this consciously, obviously, but this is what happens. I'm a really creative person. I've got something to say. The only way I can say it is through this music, because this music is seen, it's been placed by the establishment as being not only commercially viable, so it's going to make a lot of money, and that money is going to go to the white people, by the way, right, because they're going to control it, but also because it's a novelty, nobody really cares. It's not being judged. There's a number of geniuses that step into this. I would say Jelly Roll Morton would be one of those. Sidney Bechet is one of those. And both of those share two different aspects of jazz. Jelly Roll Morton's a great pianist, but he didn't have the chops to play the fast sort of boogie-woogie piano that was becoming the thing then. So he decided his genius would come out in his arrangements. And Jelly Roll Morton becomes one of the first people to arrange jazz. Fletcher Henderson, he's almost like a contemporary. He's a little bit after, but he's also a great arranger. These are all black musicians. And then we have Duke Ellington. Fletcher Henderson's idea of how to arrange jazz will then eventually create swing music, which then creates the popular music of the 20th century. Fletcher Henderson should have his statues of him everywhere, you know. The other genius is Sidney Bechet. Sidney Bechet is a loader. He doesn't belong to any class of anybody. If you read how he saw himself, it's bizarre. You know, he saw himself as being a Frenchman, but he acknowledged the black aspect of him, but he was a Creole. Creoles are really... I could do a whole video on Creoles, right? I do have a video called The Genesis of Jazz. It's a documentary, not like me just talking, and it lays out what I think is how jazz started. Sidney Bechet, he's like instrumental soloing genius. He's the first great soloist. When he improvises, it's not just, an expression of abandon, loud and, and raucous vocalized sounds, for people to jump up and down. No, Sidney Bechet is a genius. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was taught by the Tio family, who were, I think they were Italian family, that had Creole elements, but were a white family, basically, that were exponents of Italian clarinet technique. And it was that technique that Sidney Bechet was brought up into, which enabled him to improvise. The reason why people can improvise at a virtuoso level is in part down to their technique. You just can't if you haven't got the chops. Sidney Bechet had the chops. Louis Armstrong's a different kettle of fish. He's got the arrangement chops way past Jelly Roll Morton. I would say way past Fletcher Henderson. And he's got the soloing chops way past anyone else. And on top of this, the way he plays and phrases and solos encompasses all music. He pulls everything in, from the honk of the car horn to the train to the classical technique to the reveille. He's got everything in there. It's as though somebody goes and says, you see the language of jazz, it's like this. I'm going to get it and pull it out, and suddenly it's like this. And he can do anything. And he understands recorded music. He puts a band specially together to exploit recording and exploit the fact that jazz is improvised. Right, when you listen to Louis Armstrong records, they're not like modern jazz records, because the totality of everything, they're also pop music records. There's also their rap and hip hop records. Everything is there. Right, I could do I've done video after video just explaining that absolute genius. Now, Louis Armstrong's a black man and he's a genius. Now, if you want to focus on that, and people seem like they want to do, he's a black genius. Right? That grows out of jazz. Louis Armstrong's worldview, right? If someone was to say, I don't think you're right, I don't think jazz is American music, Andy. I think it's Louis Armstrong's music. I would go, yes. That is far more accurate description of what it is. It's a product of Louis Armstrong. It's a product of Duke Ellington. It's a product of Fletcher Henderson. It's and of course, the genius that is there, it's arguable that no white person could have done this. And it's not because of some genetic stroke cultural thing that's in the genes. When, this is like, for me, the most ugliest aspect of it. It just doesn't exist. There's no scientific backing for it. Nobody's born with natural rhythm. That reduces certain people to being like sort of innate native, noble savages, and then also places us white people very sophisticated because we do our genius from an intellectual level. Jazz is an incredible art form because it's equal, if not for me, beyond classical music. It's incredibly sophisticated, and it's not jungle music. It's not about, bongo rhythms and all that type of stuff. It was portrayed like that by the sort of white, the white music business, and musicians at that time, because they wanted to be well off and they wanted to have some security, would play into that. Jungle music was a description of Duke Ellington in the early days. Anyone who puts Duke Ellington on and listens to any of it, it's like the most sophisticated music that's pulling from, romantic composition. It's got stuff from North African music. If you think of something like Caravan and the sound that is encompassed there, and that can only be like a culturally appropriated idea of a caravan in North Africa. Duke Ellington would have had no understanding of that, and yet he's able to bring in a certain sound which has got like the gap scale and it has all that beautiful stuff. Later on, Dizzy Gillespie starts to pull in, Afro-Cuban elements in and bring all those types of things in. Just what jazz does. This is what's amazing about jazz. Duke Ellington's not jungle music. It's the most stupid description. It's entirely racist. Those musicians of the early days are working within a racist world, obviously. So Louis Armstrong's incredible. He has to work within the remit of what he's got. Like I said, he's the great genius of the 20th century for me on every single level. He's operating in this world. In the 1920s, we have the Harlem Renaissance. You know, black people start to benefit from the technological advances of modernism, which start to emerge in the 1920s. And that's not to say Jim Crow isn't killing them, it bloody is. But they start to benefit from that, and from that you get an intellectual class, which has really come out of people like Booker T. Washington, and so we have the Harlem Renaissance. Also, jazz straight away, within a matter of 3 years, is all over the world. That's another thing no one ever mentions. It's everywhere. You know, people like Sid Phillips here in the UK are making jazz records by 1926. All right, it's everywhere. And European people, they see the incredible artistic achievement of someone like Louis Armstrong or Jelly Roll Morton. They can see it, and they start to write about it. And in France, they put out a magazine called the Hot Club of France, and they put a group behind it. And then we get our first two bona fide genius musicians that aren't from America, Stefan Grappelli and Django Reinhardt. Now, Django Reinhardt also is one of the first guitar players, and Django's approach as a virtuoso guitarist, along with Charlie Christian, is going to invent guitar playing, which of course is rock music, blah, blah, blah. So Django's held in high regard. There's no Black Sabbath or heavy metal without Django. But what I've always said is Stefan Grappelli, I think, is even a greater improviser than Django. And Stefan Grappelli spent the whole of the 20th century improvising as a level which has not been surpassed by anyone. He is in that rare echelon, for me, of a Charlie Parker, a Miles Davis, a Louis Armstrong, John Coltrane, and Stefan Grappelli. Art Tatum. I'll keep adding them if I keep going, so I'll stop. And so now jazz is worldwide, right? So again, this is down to the genius of jazz. But that period from 1923 through to the advent of bebop, the real genius of jazz was created by black people. It wasn't created by black people because they were black. It was created by black people because they were geniuses. And their geniuses will not be acknowledged while we were saying it, oh, it's just down to their black. If we go back to the many videos by Truth Savior, who's pushed back up against this channel, if you actually listen to what he was saying, he's saying we did this and we did that. It's not our fault that we are just better than everybody else. He basically says that we've never been better in relationship to creativity and innovation and brilliant musicianship. Not our fault that we're better than everybody else. That is a human trait, and I'm afraid, you know, Western European academic thinking has it in bucket loads. You know, the white colonialists thought we were better than everybody else for centuries. Right, so we then start to get to a second generation in the end of the 1940s, all right? And these people, the next generation in, they look at Louis Armstrong and they love him. They look at Duke Ellington, they look at all these players, they love them. But they look at jazz, which has begat so many music forms, and these musicians go, look, this music, right, was created by these genius black people. I'm an intellectual. I'm a talented person. I want to express myself in this form because I can't express it anywhere else. I'm consciously aware of this now. I want to express myself in this form. And they look around and go, look what's happened. Artie Shaw, Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, they're all multimillionaires. What about us? What's happening to us? This is totally understandable at that time. And musicians at that point, that second generation of black musicians, want to take out the popular elements, which quite rightly they see as being African American, i.e., in this respect, in a negative way, coming out of minstrelsy. Dizzy Gillespie, who's the next great trumpet great, and loved Louis Armstrong, as he emerges, there is now a sort of generational fight with Louis Armstrong wrongly denigrating the beboppers, and the beboppers wrongly denigrating Louis Armstrong. Hopefully, if I remember, I can pull that in later on, because it was a period of time, and it had to happen. It had to happen. If we go back to Minton's and we look at those jam sessions with Kenny Clarke and Thelonious Monk and Charlie Christian and see that as being the beginning of bebop, it's all black musicians, genius black musicians. And the idea of blackness emerges with bebop. Now, of course, that music form, it's open and democratic, so we get an influx of white musicians. In some cases, brilliant musicians. Stan Levy is one of the greatest bebop drummers of all time. Without the sort of inputs of other white musicians later on, like Lee Konitz, and on the Birth of the Cool sessions with Miles Davis, Jerry Mulligan, and the incredible arrangements of some man that's just escaped my thinking, the arranger that worked with Miles Davis called Gil Evans. It pulls these things in, but what we've got is a division. And the commercial, I'm going to call them the minstrel aspects of jazz, the commercial entertainment aspects, because you've got to remember minstrelsy was the biggest, most popular entertainment form in America. And it created superstars out of certain black performers who had made themselves millionaires, that had businesses that had done a whole bunch of stuff that if you were arguing for the pride in your community as a black person, you would be going, look at this person, the first person to direct a play on Broadway was this, but it's minstrelsy. And minstrelsy is by the sort of emerging black awareness, is sidelined. And actually, minstrelsy it morphs and it goes through into rock and roll, and it emerges in rock music. So people will say, "Oh, Elvis Presley appropriated black music." Well, he didn't. He was born into it. It was established. He lived and breathed it. And because he lived and breathed it, he could get up as a white bloke and do all the stuff, this leg shaking and all the performancing and all that sort of stuff that comes from minstrelsy, which propelled him to being a superstar. You have to understand, if you're a British rock musician like me, we get up and play. I can't do what James Brown does. But Prince could, Michael Jackson could. And the reason is because that tradition goes straight back to minstrelsy. It's high entertainment. It's like, we're going to blow you away with dancing and comedy and brilliant music, and it's going to be tight and rehearsed, That aspect goes into popular music. And the bebop thing creates this idea of now jazz is a high art form. Now, in doing that, it destroys itself. I love bebop. I love all the weird esoteric music that came out after bebop. I love it, but I'm aware that that's where jazz then becomes too esoteric for the normal person, and it's on a hiding to dying, basically. Okay, it's gonna lose out. And jazz musicians emerging in this have gone from being sidelined because they were black to now they're being sidelined because they don't make commercial music. And they're looking around, and I think they're wrong. I think they're actually wrong. Now we come to Rahsaan Roland Kirk. Rahsaan Roland Kirk was born in 1935. When bebop was being created, he was 6 or 7 years old. He sort of reached his adulthood, I suppose, 1955. He's a few years older than my dad, okay? He emerges in the late 50s, gets taken on by Charlie Mingus. He's a virtuoso saxophone player, but he's one of a kind. When he was, I think, 2 years old, a nurse dropped too much of this eye drop stuff into his eyes. God knows what they were doing back then, and blinded him. He was a blind person, and as a blind person, he had double the sort of prejudice. And he said something that's very powerful. And I don't think this would go down well amongst the black community. He said, yeah, if you're black, you're prejudiced against. But if you are blind, you get treated like a dog. He goes, you walk into a restaurant and people go, would he like to sit over here? Right? That's a quote from Rahsaan Roland Kirk. He's extremely interested in jazz. He studies, he's a virtuoso saxophone player, but he's more than that. He was... had incredible knowledge of jazz history. Now, fair enough. I've got good knowledge of jazz history, you know, why should we boast about that? He did something that I have learnt to do. He learnt about jazz history by listening to the music. He became a scholar by listening. And he would take his friends down to the local record shop and he would get them to stand and read out the notes on the back of every single jazz album in there. He acquired his knowledge as a almost like in an was for him would have been like an oral tradition, and I think this made him see the world in a different place. As a blind man, his way of playing saxophone is interesting in that he's like one of these players who he's like a herald. He announces himself. Okay. He at some point acquires a saxello, which was broken, and he had to fix it, and then he christened that the manzello, and he acquired a stritch, which I think is it's an alto saxophone that's been straightened out. He would play these all at the same time. This acquired for him some sort of profile. It was like a novelty. And some people could have said, well, that's just a novelty. This is the whole key with Rahsaan Roland Kirk. His genius was to understand the novelty and to understand the novelty of jazz. He said that when he played live, he used to say, I can take you all the way back to Africa. He understood the history of jazz. He understood how it worked. And what he was, as he became part of that whole black coalition in free jazz. So let's just tell you about that. At the beginning of the 60s, someone like Max Roach saw the Newport Jazz Festival, saw all the white artists having the main slots and getting paid more, and thought, we can't have this. We need to have our own jazz festival. And they had this, I think it was called Freedom Now or something like that, can't remember off the top of my head, and into that free jazz emerges. And free jazz isn't just about breaking down the barriers musically, it's also it's a protest music. People like Archie Shepp and Cecil Taylor, Albert Ayler, they are drawing people back to the very beginnings. When you listen to that sort of free jazz, the sort of Archie Shepp, Albert Ayler free jazz, or Cecil Taylor, you feel that you are being taken back through time, and you're taken back to a primal scream almost that's in there. It's like the black Americans screaming that out, you know, to be seen almost. Now, the only way I can explain this with Rahsaan Roland Kirk is, what was the album called? I've got some notes here. In 1975, I think, just before he died, he made an album which has been described as the Sgt. Pepper of jazz. It's called the Case of the Three-Sided Dream in Audio Colour. And when this starts up, and this is basically an album, these 70s albums are a lot of soul, funk covers, you know, very accessible in a way, you know, almost like middle of the road, but it's not. That album opens up with God speaking to Rahsaan Roland Kirk, and he tells him to go to sleep and have a dream. I've thought about this a lot and how it relates to blackness, and now I am going to try and put across what I think is how blackness is an essential part and the basic DNA of jazz. And this will be as a counterweight or contradiction or other side of the yin-yang of me saying jazz is not black music. And hopefully will give a totality of my view of what jazz is. And I'm going to do it by talking about that album that I came into contact and the man who did it, Rahsaan Roland Kirk. Rahsaan Roland Kirk emerged as part of that free jazz scene, but he wasn't a part of it. He was separate to it. His sort of utilisation of performance, he would talk to the audience. He saw Pete Townsend smashing a guitar, so he would come out and smash a chair up before we started playing, and all the sort of the blind man performing, you know, and the playing the three saxophones at the same time. Now, in sort of black music, sort of, I don't even want to call it culture, there is the genius blind black person. We go back to Blind Lemon Jefferson. We've got Blind Blake. There's so many blind people at the beginning of, black music of the 1920s. We then have Ray Charles. Ray Charles basically invents soul music. He sort of invents funk music, and he's a visionary. He's a visionary, but he's blind. Then we have Stevie Wonder, don't we? And Stevie Wonder has that album called Inner Visions, where he sat there and you could see the beams coming out of his eyes. Russell Roland Kirk's like that. Because he's blind, he sees more deeply in a way. All right? His understanding of what it is to be black in America is completely unique. These guys were right. The ones who were focusing on the money, they were basically going, this music's black music. All right? Now, in that respect, I agree with them. Going back to the history I've got and looking at the geniuses that are created and how that have been appropriated, if you're born in 1935 like Russell Roland Kirk, you were born right at the height of that. 1935 is when swing is taken over the world, and it's been appropriated. It's directly appropriated. It's just, it couldn't happen. When Benny Goodman decided to become one of the biggest artists in the world, sell millions of records, he went and got Fletcher Henderson and brought him in. Fletcher Henderson benefited from it because his arrangements were true arrangements. Benny Goodman was a serious player, brilliant soloist, and his arrangements were proper jazz. Okay? And so Russell Roland Kirk was fundamentally arguing for a piece of the action. And he was arguing that all this popular music, everything that you love, and I'm adding stuff into it. I would say, but Rassan, it's bebop's fault. Right? But his idea was that Motown and soul and funk and rock and all this type of stuff was part of that tradition, and that black people should get an equal cut of it. And he did the right thing. He goes to London. He gets on the same bill as Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix loved him. When Jimi Hendrix arrived in London, the album he took with him was, I think it was Rip, Rig and Panic by Russell Roland Kirk. Russell Roland Kirk, and this is why I knew the name, he's name checked by Frank Zappa. All right? Russell Roland Kirk went his own way. He was open to this music, popular music, and he existed within that realm and reminded everybody of where this music had come from. And that is the description of blackness. Now, you could say, well, you've just contradicted yourself. No, it's a dream. Blackness is a dream. Blackness, and this is going to be the hardest thing to explain, I think. God calls Russell Roland Kirk to close his eyes and dream. And on the album, The Case of the Three-Sided Dream in Audio Colour, he dreams a whole bunch of tunes. I want to go through these tunes because if you just put this album on, this is a work of art. The musicians on it, it's a mixture of all. Who's on drums on this killer album? Steve Gadd's on drums, Cornell Dupree's on this album, Richard T's on this album, Ralph McDonald's on this album. And it opens up with God calling him to do this. And then it goes into a jazz standard, Bye Bye Blackbird. Jazz standard, it's like what? It's a musical piece that jazz musicians played. We're going right back to sort of 1930s jazz with that. It don't last for 2 minutes, it fades out. And then we get these horses running around and we start to, and the thing is with this album, it's been called the Jazz Sgt. Pepper because these tunes, which are all quite popular tunes, are inside this sort of swirling sound effects and monologues and stuff like this, and it feels like a dream. It's a dream of this music. We get tunes like Echoes of Primitive Ohio and Chili Dogs. He's taking you by the hand through this sort of dream landscape, and he eventually comes to a tune called The Entertainer, which of course in 1973, 2 years before, had become one of the most popular tunes in the world because of its inclusion in the film The Sting. Here he makes an incredible artistic statement, The Entertainer, and he takes that and he does it in the style of a blues. Right? There's a statement there. God wills Russell Roland Kirk to have a dream. He has a dream and it takes him back to the beginning of it, to the one thing that actually is the genius of black Americans, and it's Scott Joplin and that ragtime. 1860, and The Entertainer. It's really hard for me to get this into. I can't get the full power of what this means. He's gone right back to the source. Right? People say this was black. No, it's not. Scott Joplin is. That's where it's at. And is that down to the black community? No, it's down to the fact that Scott Joplin was a genius. He could take the Sousa marches, he could take American folk music, he could take classical music. He was an incredible composer who had the vision of a European composer. He had all that down, and he was able to stitch it into a music style that over, well, not quite 100 years later, was still entertaining people. Was still loved. Now, when I was listening to this album and this blues version comes up and he's going, it's funky. I thought, I know that tune. He's changed it so much. I thought, I know that tune. I thought, that's a white tune, that is. It's, it's The Entertainer off the Sting. Oh no, that's a black tune. He made me think that. The album carries on. Freaks for the Festival, Portrait of Beautiful Ladies. Portrait of Beautiful Ladies, it doesn't say, but it's actually based on God Bless the Child. And I assume if I listen more, we'd hear a whole bunch of tunes associated with people like Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. He's going through American music, right? And then, as the album's nearing the end, he returns to The Entertainer. But this time, it goes nuclear. And it becomes like a Coltrane-fueled things. And then he returns to Bye Bye Blackbird. Now, this album's a double album. The third side is blank. It's empty. But when you put it on, there is some music there. I haven't listened to it yet. I wanted to leave, the fact is it's 12 minutes and I would have had to sit through silence, and I was so fired up to do this video by the time I'd gathered all my thoughts I wanted to do it. I haven't heard it, but it's quite obvious to me that Rasamar Kernsky's going, like, the third side of this, it's blank. It's for people to fill in. What is blackness? Blackness is the dream of an African-American slave. It's the dream of freedom. It's the dream of emancipation. And it's the pursuit of that through this music form. It's not about who did what or who did whatever like that. It's about an artistic summation of the experience of African Americans, which is unique. And the idea is that there should be reparations, or people should pay for it, or we've got to, people should respect this or respect that, and they should do this and they should call the music that. Now, Russ and Roland Kirk wanted the music to be called black classical music. This, 20 years later, emerges as a thing in jazz. And I want to finish off by talking about that because, for me, it's really hard to fight the powers that be. In 1975, I think, he had a massive stroke. He was 40 years old. He carried on playing, and then 2 years later he died at 42. Another genius jazz musician gone too early, died exactly the same age as Coltrane. I don't get it. This guy was so young. I see him as a giant. I'm now like 14 years older than him or something when he died. 13 years older than him. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. So, in America's always been striving to create art forms for itself. It wanted to have the great American painter, the great American poet, the great American, composer. It's always wanted to that. A little bit of insecurity as being the most important country on the planet, but not having that history like we have here in England. We don't have to worry about stuff like that. We've got everybody galore. We've invented virtually everything when it comes to the arts, also we think. America is looking for it, but they don't realise they've got it. They ignore it. They've created the two great art forms of the 20th century, which would be film and popular music, jazz, soul, funk, and all that bit. Then we could back that up with television and all the art that's been on television. There's a few other things that they've... America is basically... They have monopolised culture in the world. black Americans have played a huge part in that. Partly because the establishment, the educated elite, ignored what was going on and allowed them to do it. By the time they notice it, they do what the elite always does when they notice it. Well, actually, this is really worthwhile. And so we need to grab it, stop anybody changing it and turning it into a museum piece so it will never become anything else again. And this happened with the sort of switch politically from the 1960s, that idea of creating a new utopian world, the revolutionary newness that the 1960s audience wanted, that Rahsaan Roland Kirk understood and put himself into. By the time we get to the 1980s here in the United Kingdom and in America, you have a return to conservatism. And his idea, I think, goes a bit of a funny way, because this idea then emerges of black American classical music, black classical. Jazz is black classical music. Ronald Reagan comes in and he's like, I'm not funding all this avant-garde experimental rubbish, people, sticking bricks in art galleries and doing all sorts of untold things. Yoko Ono sat there having her clothes cut off her and all this weird. It's not right, we're not going to fund that, making taxpayers. That's conservative thinking. And jazz fills the void. The jazz rock thing, which is almost like a return to the values of the swing era, okay, where jazz had come back. I mean, the biggest selling jazz albums in history are from the jazz rock period, and yet jazz wants to ignore it. Why? Because of what happened in the 1980s. That excitement and innovation that happened in the 1960s allowed jazz rock musicians to make proper exploratory electric rock jazz and sell lots and lots of records. But by the end of the 70s, that was falling apart. And the record companies weren't interested in that. Jazz had been completely wiped out by that. And proper jazz, the conservative end of jazz, were like, oh, we don't like the jazz rock. It wiped us out. Look, Grover Washington sitting there playing his soft music, that's not where it's at. And you see this stated in the Ken Burns documentary. Once he gets to the 1970s, he goes, well, not much happened really. I mean, Keith Jarrett made a very heavyweight album called The Calm Concert that sold 6 million copies. John McLaughlin and Aldo Meola did the Friday Night in San Francisco that sold 6 million copies. These are the biggest selling albums in jazz. And they're proper jazz and they're solo, and it's got every aspect that you'd have a jazz. But we're just going to ignore that. And we're going to say, in some loft in New York, Dexter Gordon did a gig, and that was the most important thing in the 1970s. That's what Ken Burns states. They see jazz as something that had to be rescued. And it's rescued and it's brought back in the 1980s. It's brought back by the Young Lions and the funding that is then attached to that. By 1987, we are getting, I think it was Bill Clinton announces his fund for the preservation of jazz. That funding comes in and the money's there. The money's there if you are promoting black classical music, just like the money was there in the 1920s if you were doing this novelty music that the elites hated but the general public loved. And jazz becomes wrapped up in it as a museum piece. And much as I love Wynton Marsalis, and much as Wynton has developed, he's moved away from that sort of seeing jazz as black American music. He doesn't. He sees it. He was a sort of disciple of Stanley Crouch. Stanley Crouch came out of Albert Murray, and he believes in that omni-American. I've had pushback already about this on the channel, arguments about this omni-America thing. I know that is the contentious thing here. I know that's what people are going to be picking on, and I have to say, I do understand all this. I've got to say to you that I understand all this. I'm aware of the history. I could argue the other side, and I'm trying to do that here. But I am trying to put an argument across here that explains from a truth point of view what jazz is, from a utilitarian point of view what jazz is, and how are you going to do what Rahsaan Roland Kirk did and safeguard jazz and the blackness in jazz. How do you safeguard that from being exploited? Because one thing I have to say, if you look at jazz at the Lincoln Center and you look at Wynton Marsalis, and I love the guy, he's an incredible player. He's getting a couple of million every year to run it. They're on stage, they've got their suits on, people turn up that are like much more wealthier than me and they buy a ticket and they do stuff in the style of Duke Ellington. Right? I can't hear the blackness there. That thing I was talking about, I just don't hear it there. Where do I hear it? Well, for a time I heard it in hip-hop and rap. But rap's been appropriated and it's gone. And Wynton's right when he says rap's turned into the minstrel show. All of it turns into the minstrel show. As soon as the elites get it, they turn it back into the minstrel show. How do you get it so that people can just from a objective point of view judge these musicians not as being black musicians but being geniuses, and be able to rid themselves of the lens which sees them as being black? How do we get to that point? Russ and Roland Kirk never really sided with the sort of Archie Ships and the sort of black coalition, black power element of it. People often thought he was because he got the name Rassan, but Rassan isn't means he's a disciple of Elijah Muhammad. It doesn't mean that. Rassan was a name that come to him in a dream. This idea of the dream, this is the esoteric bit of this video. The dream that Sun Ra explores. Sun Ra and Russ and Roland Kirk have really related to me. There's a mythic aspect of it. It places blackness as being an aesthetic thing, which is almost like a magical thing. It exists. It is created within the dream. I have a dream that one day my kids will be judged not by the colour of their skin, by the content of their character. Now, I know there's a whole bunch of identitarian twats out there that will say I'm being a racist for saying that and quoting that, but I'm not quoting that to try and argue for colour blindness and that in that way I'm absolving myself of my white guilt. I'm concentrating on the dream. Mike Luther King has a dream, and he speaks to it in the same way as Rassan Roland Kirk has a dream. Sun Ra has a whole, because I think Sun Ra's in this as well. So we return back to me, I suppose, because it has to end up being subjective. Why was it that a British kid heard this music, whether it's Oscar Peterson or Duke Ellington or James Brown or Stevie Wonder or even Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath? I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not going to name who it's about because it would be unfair, I think. When I was a college lecturer, I'm going to tell you one of the most proudest moments for me as a musician, and I will sound arrogant saying this because it does paint me in a good light, and I'm aware of that. But I say it more humbly. I was very proud of this. When I was teaching at the college, a friend of mine turned up, and he turned up with this black guy. This black American walks in with him. And he says, remember, we got a workshop and organised for today with this gentleman. And I'd totally forgotten. It was so disrespectful. I'd just forgotten this guy. I'd come all the way from America. I'd forgotten about it. So there was nothing organised. So I sent them off for a cup of coffee while going, yeah, of course we have. I'm just going to get set. Go and get me a cup of coffee. So they took him away, and then I ran round, set up the room, got all the students in, told them what was going on, and I sat them all there. And when he came up, he walks in and he sits down. And I sit at the front. Now, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what his name is. I have got no idea, but I should have, but I'm an idiot. And I've forgotten. So I'm sat there and they're talking about this guy and what he's done. It turns out he played with some incredible funk and soul artists like my heroes, like heavyweight player. And we're sat there and this guy, I'll say this bit and then you can work it out. And this guy played bass with Zigaboo, the drummer from The Meters. So we sat there and my mate's talking about it and I'm shuffling and this guy's staring straight at me. He knows. He's looking at me going, you don't know about this, do you? I can tell, he's not full. And my mate says, do you want to get up and play some bass for the students? And he goes, why don't you play Sissy Strut by The Meters? And then he turns around to me and goes, yeah, Andy, you said you'd play on that. Well, I can't remember this, but now I've got to get on drums and play Sissy Strut by The Meters. Now, Sissy Strut's an open-handed drum beat. It's quite hard to play. And I would have need to look at it and learn it, right? And I haven't. I'm in the middle. I'm to pretend. So I get on stage and we start playing it. So I just play it like I feel it. I can't remember the beat. We're playing like this, and I'm trying to cover it. And when we get to the end, this bloke who has been looking at me in this sort of, you don't know, I've come all the way to this, you've done organised nothing, here I am, blah, 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 I'm not getting paid enough, probably not getting paid anything, doing it as a favour, you haven't got, all that was going on. That went. This guy looks around to me and smiles, and he says straight off, he goes, I can play with this guy. All right? And the reason was, and I think I said, what do you mean? I said, well, because where he's placing his beat, where that backbeat is. Right, I was so proud at that point that a lifetime of listening to all those drummers and me trying to assimilate it and have what I would call is the blackness that exists in rhythm, in groove, in the drums, the placement of it. Some people call it pocket. I don't think it's any of these things. It's something you either get in your soul or you don't. Right, it's something that's in you. And I think some people have it and some people don't. I do, So we look at who's drumming on this Russ and Roland Kirk album, Steve Gadd. Steve Gadd's got the heaviest pocket of anybody. There's blackness. Now, the idea that Russ and Roland Kirk is spelt it in a different way, I think is great because it separates it from blackness. It's a thing that it exists in the ether. Should black people be proud of that? Yeah, they should, because it's part of their cultural heritage. That is that dream, that desire to have your say. But the only way you can have your say and get it heard to is by getting people's attention. And you have to go deep into your soul of who you are and pull out something that grabs that attention. That's what blackness is. And it grabs people's attention and it goes out and it reaches someone like me in the UK and I respond to it. And what that does, it gives you a seat at the table. And that's what Martin Luther King was asking for in his dream. And that is politically where Russ and Roland Kirk differed and it was not aligned with the rest of the sort of free jazz, black power thing, black coalition thing, sorry. He was different to that. He proposed what was called the bread baskets, Like James Brown said, open up the door and I'll get it myself. Well, what opens the door? Well, for me, they opened a door in me. So, that is what I think blackness is. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you very much.